Right.
Hi there. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this morning or afternoon, wherever you're located. We're really excited to present this webinar with Dato HR, Swag Up, and Recruiting Brain Food. I'm going to hand everything over to Hung Lee, and we'll get started.
So I'm assuming that I'm on camera. Is that right? Let's just start off with a few housekeeping things. Folks, I can see you sort of joining the session. So welcome to the show. If you can hear me okay and you can see me okay, can you just let me know whether that is okay? It's important that we're not talking in some sort of space where you can't actually hear. So, okay, we can see some emojis go up, some thumbs. I love it. Make full use of the emojis, folks. We all know emojis help our mood. So you can see a few features here. Just a couple of bits of housekeeping for folks who haven't used AirMeet before. I think it's a really cool tool. Lots of things you can use. You're already on the emojis at the bottom, as you can see. There should be a chat feature as well at the kind of the top right of your screen. So make sure you make use of that and talk to each other, talk to us. We'll be monitoring that and we'll be trying to engage with you there. There may even be a Q&A thing. I'm not sure whether there is, but if that exists, put a question in there, and we're going to get to those towards the end of the session and make sure we deal with sort of all the questions that you can, that you have for us. Okay, let's get on with the chat. We're talking about how we transition from a great candidate experience to a great employee experience. I don't know about you folks, but I remember back in my recruiting days, there was always this like enormous gap between, you know, when you've offered a candidate, the person's accepted, and then there was this like amorphous limbo period before they started, and you as the recruiter were just wondering, crossing to heck that they can actually show up on day. It's always been clear to me that this is a problem. Today, we're going to be talking about why that is and how we're going to fix it. We've got some great examples to talk about. Have a think yourself as well. Like, how have you done your candidate to employee transition? Are you satisfied with it? What kind of things do you think you could do better? Might be cool for us to all crowdsource some sort of ideas towards the end of the show also. And then maybe we've got a takeaway that we can all share. Anyway, without further ado, let's introduce our amazing guests. Let's go with Michael first. Michael, can you introduce yourself? Who are you? What it is you do?
Yeah, for sure. I'll keep it really quick. Founder of Swag Up. We basically make it super simple to create and automate, distribute branded merchandise around the globe. We deal with a lot of new hire onboarding, work anniversaries, but also across use cases for different companies. So we get to see, we have a window into how a lot of different companies kind of run their pre-boarding, onboarding experiences, employee engagement beyond that. So super excited to dive into this topic.
That's interesting. So you can come at it from two angles, Michael, because you obviously supply into that problem area as a business. So that's really interesting. And secondly, also as a hiring manager, as a person in charge of a growing business, like you've had to grow your company. So I'd be interested to see what lessons you've learned sort of from your own journey there, which is going to be fascinating. Okay, we've also got Ariel Kilroy here as well. Ariel, can you introduce yourself? Who are you? What it is you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a founder of Dato. We are an employee experience management platform. We manage all kinds of employee experiences at scale, pre-boarding and onboarding being by far the most popular one, but then of course everything from offboarding and promotions, parental leave. I mean, honestly, if you think it, you can, our customers have built it. So I really get to work with some of the leaders in the space to watch as they iterate in a data-driven way to make a fantastic pre-boarding.
It's an interesting term, pre-boarding. Let's start with this. I would say 5 years or so ago, let's say, pre-boarding may not have really existed as a term within the recruiting space. We talked about onboarding. We thought about, yes, we have to get the onboarding right. But of course, onboarding starts on day one of that person being an employee. So pre-boarding is what is happening in between those two milestones of offer accepted, this person has signed the contract, and this person is starting day one. What is the pre-boarding sort of phase? Can you give us any information as to has happened? Has there been any industry research, for instance, with regards to what occurs in that space? Why has it emerged as a problem area that we've got to try and fix? Ariel, maybe you could start with us on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we see a lot of industry research into how important it is to invest in this space, because we know how important it is to replace somebody when this doesn't go well. Especially because we're dealing with a lot of, we talk to a lot of talent people. The stats around replacing someone who leaves is between 30% of their salary to all the way to 2 times their yearly salary, right? And that figure changes heavily depending on how long they stay. So if you spent all of that money to bring them in and then they leave before even day one or within, say, the first 90 days, that is completely wasted money. And that is just about the hard dollars or euros or whatever currency and the time. It's even more so because it's morale and opportunity cost. And those are 2 things we tend to forget about when you have those kinds of that kind of turnover, which is the fact that if you can't retain, you spend all this time recruiting someone and you can't retain them that early on, it's a bad signal to send to the teams that are bringing them in, right? And then, of course, what are you not doing because that person's not there? So there is a lot of, I would say, great industry knowledge now and how much it costs to replace them. Even that, I would say, is still limited because it doesn't include the knock-on effects, right, of when that happens.
Yeah, I'm really pleased you talked about morale there, Ariel, because it is probably one of the most demoralizing things that you can experience as a recruiter, to have put all that effort in to recruit this person, rejected a whole bunch of other people. You close the door on those other folks, and then this person fails to show, or they're bouncing after a day or two because something's happened in between times that's caused that to occur. Really demoralizing for you. And if you're an in-house recruiter also, I think it is a huge credibility damage to your function and damage to you personally, because you persuaded people, hey, this is the right person. Then they don't show. You've got to face up to the line manager. You've got to face up to everyone else. They're all going to be very kind, of course, and say, yeah, it's not your fault, hung. But you know what? You're going to feel that it is. Folks, have you had that experience? I wonder whether anybody's got scars on their back with this one. Have you recruited someone, you offered them and they didn't show up day one, or they showed up in the first week and they left? I mean, how did that make you feel? I'd be interested to know what your feeling is on that. Michael, put you and Johnny on the spot. You're the CEO of a business. Has this happened to you? And if so, can you tell us about it?
100%. It's happened where both people have not showed up on the first day, and also people that we were really excited about after a week or two realize it's not for them. And I think there's a lot of reasons for it. I think, first off, I think what's really important is that the entire experience feels connected and seamless, all the way from where you found that candidate and their interviews and the process with TA. Because if you think, a lot of times TA and recruiting is about selling, you're selling really hard. You're getting these people super excited and amped up to join this company. And then, they sign the offer letter, and then all of a sudden you don't talk to them for 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks, and they just show up one day. And it's just this really awkwardness. So you really need to be deliberate about what those first couple interactions feel like, before leading up to join the company. And they should feel consistent with the energy and effort that you put into, getting them into the door to begin with. And then, as Ariel said, and you said as well, there's also a big cultural component. How can you start to get people integrated into the culture before they even start to feel what this company is going to be like before they even get in there, so that it just kind of becomes like a continuity of experience? Because first impressions matter. And if you come in and it's just very flat and messy and disorganized, that's what you're going to just think that culture is like going forward.
You know what, you mentioned lots of interesting things, Michael, but let's talk about that aspect of having something to say after the deal's done. Because I think you're right. Recruiters is a crescendo of activity. We're very frenetic. We're probably never more enthusiastic. The person's best friend, the candidate's best friend, right until the point they sign. And then they would just drop them. Box that person, job done, let's go to the next candidate. That's the default that we go to. And how does that person then feel as a result of, feeling of just being concierged all the way through, and then there's a big stop because you've committed something? It kind of feels like, was it all fake? Was it all, did that person really mean this, etc., etc.? thought bubble here. Would it make sense then for us recruiters to have like a protocol to say, this person's offered, here is a step list, like you do in NASA, you remember Apollo 13, they're all talking about protocols, right? They weren't just like leaving it to intuition. They literally had a checklist to say, look, if this happens, we have to do this. So if recruiters actually had a post-offer acceptance checklist, I think that would be useful, wouldn't it, folks? Like just as a little crib sheet you can hand out to all of your recruiters to say, hey, here is what I want you to do. Okay, after the sort of, if this person is accepted on Friday, Monday, you need to be in contact with that candidate just to say, hey, checking this, and this. Everyone's excited. We've just announced it, blah, blah. Do something, and then just keep going through that process and make sure the communication cadence is at a certain level before, as that person starts. So you're joining those two events in your terms, Michael, in a seamless way, rather than just high intensity engagement and a zero intensity engagement. That's no good. If we were to do a protocol, what would that look like? Can you give us some kind of clue? I'll throw it to both of you guys.
So I'll jump in. I would love to start this one. So I think a lot of companies have a version of this. The problem is not the list. The problem is the challenge in execution. I think that, so you should definitely have a smooth handover, and you should know what happens post offer. But you might have ambitions there, but when you're sitting there prioritizing your work in a day to day, and we know that HR is generally speaking one of the most understaffed and under-resourced areas of the business, even though that they contribute so much to the success of the business, that you're prioritizing against a million things, and that checklist gets deprioritized always. It's also very challenging to do that checklist at scale. So it depends on how big your company is. Checklist might be fine for you, in which case then you're really looking at a couple of things, and I can kind of itemize what you should probably have there. And if you're large enough, and I would say that's really post 100, 150, then you start thinking about how can we create efficiencies and make this smoother and more consistent. And that's where you're going to bring in a tool stack to help you do that. So definitely some items that should be on that list. So first off, you should welcome them. I cannot say how important actually things like swag are actually to making somebody feel like they're part of the team. There's a reason why sports teams wear uniforms, right? It's not just so you can identify in the field, because it creates camaraderie. And this is why you'll see on LinkedIn, so many people are posting themselves with their swag because they're excited. It builds that team feeling even before you start. And then things like being able to navigate the compliance stuff. It's never fun for anyone. How can you make it really easy? And if I would give you one point to avoid, is what we call the giant PDF. If you can, do not send the giant PDF, because then you're putting the burden of navigating your organization onto the employee. You just took them through this concierge service and then said, oh, and here's the manual, figure it out yourself. And it's a very big switch, I would say, to helping to the experience of that person.
Yeah, some interesting points. So firstly, we need to, and I should have mentioned this earlier, the reason why there's this shocking difference is, of course, recruiters often then hand over the management of the person to another function. And that's where it falls down. It always does, no matter how you play it. If you hand something over to somebody else, it always falls down. You need to kind of, I've yet to experience a scenario where the experience is actually improved in a handover scenario. There's always been a slight drop, and it's kind of okay, acceptable, right? But it's never got better as a result of that switchover. And I think it's because the context is less. The person inheriting it may not have desired to do this. They may feel as this is another thing they have to do. It's a low priority for them. They're not incentivized, perhaps. We recruiters typically are very incentivized. Offer place, we get a bonus. Sometimes it's a big commission check or something. A person who's doing the handover, how are they incentivized? So as a leader of a business, as a CEO, you need to think about that. Like, if someone's doing these activities, you've got to align incentives in place so that this person isn't penalized for doing a good thing. They're actually rewarded for doing something good. How do we do that? So lots of things that we need to implement to make sure that happens. Quick question for both of you. Does it make sense to push it to the line manager instead of HR? Because I'm thinking that, okay, HR might just think, yes, just another thing on a massive list of things to do. Whereas the hiring manager also has this massive list, but they're also, hey, this is a future team member. Like they seem as if they may have more skin in the game, right? So would it make sense to just push it to the line manager and say, listen, your job to do the checklist? Thoughts?
Well, first off, I think this whole entire scenario and situation is very similar to what happens in sales. You have the salesperson that's really excited to get, the deal closed, get the money from the customer. They close the deal, and then all of a sudden they ghost you, because you got their money, you close the deal. I'm moving on to the next big customer. And then maybe you have this customer success function and they step in. But to your point, it never is a smooth handoff because now they have to relearn all the context. So I think the way that companies have approached this problem from a sales standpoint is very similar. And I'm a believer that like the AE, the salesperson, needs to really own that relationship and manage it from end to end, no matter what. And it's the same thing with like the manager of the person. Like TA is there to support you, but I never appreciate managers that don't want to be involved in hiring, or I have recruiters for that. I don't do that. Like, no, it's your team. You're building it. You need to be leading this process. You have the support of the org to help you, but I ultimately feel that the manager should be checking in throughout the way, shepherding that experience from end to end. So I think it's really important that managers stay super, super close to the candidate the entire experience.
Yeah, I'd also say that you want HR to stay in this, like, because the thing is like they're two different completely roles. So, and also HR, right, is a big catch-all. So there's a lot of people who are more in the sort of learning and development side who are really designing a program that's going to actually help your employee reach productivity faster and smoother. And that is something that is challenging for a hiring manager to do, especially because they sit in a very specific part of the organization. And so if you want to bring them into like, how do you navigate this company? How do you actually know what our values are? I do believe that this is a critical role that HR fills, but they're not going to teach this person how to do their job. So the manager has to be involved. Otherwise, you're really just setting them up to try to navigate that entirely on their own. And why spend all that money trying to bring them in if you're not going to then actually teach them how to do the job that you just recruited them for?
Yeah, I think that's clear, isn't it? The hiring manager or the line manager has the biggest incentive of all of us, maybe even more so than the recruiter, because this is a future team member, right? They have to recruit, they have to train, they have to do all of that. So there's no more, that incentive is absolutely aligned, but they may not know what to do. Like sometimes it's a case where the job of candidate to employee management falls between the three stools. Is it TA? Is it HR? Is it line? Like, are we clear enough internally to say, you know what? Michael has just accepted the job. Here is our internal protocol. That means Ariel, Miss Hiring Manager, you need to do these things. You need to make sure this person is kind of increasingly included into the stuff that you're doing. Maybe they start joining a stand-up, let's say, in team. Perhaps you invite them, on an offsite if you're in office, or that you're doing something on a digital space. They'll treat them already as an employee rather than something at a distance. Make them included in team, because that's something that's going to matter more for the employee, this future employee, than engaging with another department that is inevitably remote from it, right? People want to know who their team members are. Michael, you're going to say something?
Yeah, no, I was saying I think this is actually one of the biggest challenges is if you just leave it on to the hiring manager to kind of figure it out and figure out the onboarding and leave it up to them for coordination, you get a really wide distribution of outcomes. You have some hiring managers that are really experienced with onboarding and hiring, and they're very thoughtful about the experience. Then you have others that are just like drowning in their day-to-day work and they don't really care about this. It's like, hey, when I have some extra time at night, I might send them a message or invite them to this meeting with this person. So I do think it's really important to have a very consistent experience across the company that people can follow. Obviously, you want the hiring manager to help lead these things and provide their input, but the company as a whole needs to take culture and onboarding seriously and have a deliberate way of doing that jives with the culture of the company and the outcome that you're trying to get out of it, and make sure that no matter who you are as an employee, you're going to go through a similar experience so that, 1 month in, 3 months in, 6 months in, you have this shared kind of knowledge layer that everybody has this foundation that they can build off of versus this wide distribution.
Yeah. What do we think about that, folks? Do we think we should leave it to the manager, or should we kind of universalize it somewhat? so that people have a minimum bar of experience. Like every new employee, future colleague can say, you know what, after 3 weeks this happened, and they can all say that actually happened to them, because that is part of how their entire sort of flow with it. It seems to make sense to me. The questionnaire is it's basically extra effort for, again, is it TA or is it hiring HR to do it? It's extra effort for some function, and we probably need to establish who owns this in order for it to actually be done. So yeah, that's a conversation probably needs to be happening at the top of department between TA and HR, I think. Michael, as you started the conversation, I wonder whether you could give us some observations as to, companies either you supply to that you think have actually done a great job of this, and maybe a couple of examples where they haven't done a good job, and you can say, you know what, here are some consistent reasons why this doesn't, they could have done it better. Any input on that, observations to share?
Yeah. Well, I think when it comes to like the physical nature of onboarding and the swag and the items and stuff, I think the best companies are the ones that are very thoughtful about like the journey, again, from start to finish. Like, for example, it's one thing to send somebody like their new hire swag pack, but there's also, like we said, that period beforehand, the period where you've been in the job for 6 months, you've been in it for a year. And the companies that do really well, like, craft this very thoughtful experience from start to finish. Like one of our customers, Calendly, they'll do like a candidate experience box. Like after you get to like the second interview and they're really excited about you, they're going to send you this box that says, hey, we really enjoyed, the conversation with you. We'd love to send you a few, items, excited for our next conversation. And what's also very interesting that we don't like pay attention to is this also becomes a viral loop for recruiting, because these candidates share that experience on LinkedIn and on Twitter, and they tell other people because they're just so blown away by it. Because as you said, 5 years ago, pre-boarding wasn't a thing. Most companies haven't figured out how to be deliberate about this experience. So the companies that are at least even doing something are standing out from the rest, and the candidates are seeing that and they feel it. And not only does that make them want to join more, it makes the people in their network want to join this company, because like, wow, like they really thought about this experience. What else are they really thoughtful about? So I think using pre-boarding and swag as a way to drive this viral top of funnel for recruiting is a very interesting tactic.
Yeah, I think that sounds so obvious, doesn't it, folks? I mean, I know that's right, dude. I don't post on Instagram. The only time I do post on Instagram when someone sends me something. It's like, yeah, he sent me a mug. I'm going to talk about that. That's fine. That's as best I can do to thank them, right? And it's a nice touch. It's a nice gift. But I love sort of the thought process behind that, because if you are a growing business, why not make mileage out of someone who is already likely to be an evangelist or an advocate for your company? You've just given them a gift. Even if they had like an average experience, that's going to boost their opinion of your company because of this gesture that you made. And again, it's about inserting that at different points in the journey. You're not just looking at, this binary of, is this person a candidate, then he's an employee, but you're thinking, this person is progressing to second stage. Maybe that's something you could do. This person has actually stayed with us for a month. That's a milestone. Let's do something there. Let's stay for 3 months. All this type of stuff. So you keep the aperture wide in terms of the life cycle of this person. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, think about it. I mean, again, I think there's a lot of parallels between hiring and onboarding and retaining talent, and finding customers, retaining customers. Like Facebook, They talk about the magic moment. Like, how do we get people to join, get 10 friends on Facebook? Because we know if they have 10 friends, then they're going to stay on the platform for a year. So if you're thinking, and maybe Ariel has some data on this, but if an employee gets to 6 months or something, or you get to a year, does that mean that they're going to stay for now 2 more years? Because most people leave in those first 6 months or something. So how do we use the onboarding experience to deliberately get them to that point where we know they're sticky and they're going to be a really positively contributing member to the team? And I think you got to think of it from like a customer acquisition, customer retention standpoint sometimes.
Yeah, that's a great point, Michael. So I also believe that there's a lot of parallels. But one thing that's missing, which makes it really challenging, is the fact that generally speaking, there isn't quantitative data at companies around any experience they run. Even pre-boarding and onboarding, they'll invest a lot of time in that. And you'll see that they'll have tons of quantitative data around recruiting. How many applicants do they get? How many went to certain stages? But then it goes to basically nothing, right? And how do you make something better if you don't know what it currently is? Most companies measure the success of their onboarding program with two metrics if they're measuring it at all. And those are usually retention after a certain period of time and the qualitative feedback they get from an engagement survey. Yet there are many, many touch points along the way that they could be measuring in a quantitative way to actually see where is the bottleneck happening, where is the drop-off happening. It can be challenging to do that if you don't have a tool. As far as I know, we're the only one that does that, but you could potentially do that by hand if you really wanted to. And that really helps you see. And we see this with our customers. They get the quantitative data back to say, okay, what are people completing? Are they completing it on time? What is happening behind the scenes? Which managers are doing the things that we've asked them to do to be able to set that new hire up with a great experience? And which ones aren't? How can I step in and actually figure out why they're not able to do that? And if you don't have that data, it can be really challenging to make it better, right? Because you don't actually know where the problems are. But starting to measure that is incredibly helpful because it allows you to see where you're successful and where you can invest.
Yeah, 100%. You're going blind, and that is the reason why this category is emerging. Ariel, well done on spotting it and actually trying to plug it. Because if you think about it, folks, you remember there's a handover between TA and HR. There's also a system switch between TA and HR. Right. I'm just thinking about the traditional ATSs you use. Like, what is at the end of the funnel? It's offer accepted. Right. That's when the journey stops in the system. The system stops there. Therefore, the data stops there. And then there's a new record created in the HRIS system, which recruiters don't know anything about. New employee starts. So because there is this like handover of the person from departments, there's also a system switch between two departments, and there's no data flow. Typically, it's a case where the record is simply recreated from scratch in the new system, and we don't have anything in between. And actually, those systems don't talk to each other. I know ATSs and HRISs are trying to fix it by building towards each other somewhat, but we're some way away from having a truly unified space, and nothing, as far as I know, that sits in between and allows you to monitor it. I can imagine it being extraordinarily painful to try and do this on a spreadsheet. If you had a reasonable size,
we have seen some wild ways in which people manage this before they come to us.
How would you even do it? Yeah, like if you had a spreadsheet and I was like I had one of my hiring managers to go through protocol, like I'd have to ask them every day, have you done it? I'd be the guy just chasing them to fill in a spreadsheet.
Yeah, no one wants that job.
No. You're not doing that. You're not making friends, and there's no sort of reason. There's no obvious sort of plus to that activity, or at least it's just kicked off down the line, which is why you do indeed maybe need a tool to fix it. Wow, hidden problems. I mean, as you look at recruiting, there's always like little gaps between these set stages. That if you're not aware of them, we don't realize that actually is a hidden issue. And great that we're starting to figure this out. Let's talk about sort of the pre-boarding side, the pluses and minuses of the shift to remote in the pre-boarding space. I think this is genuinely a plus and minus, because in many respects, the sort of in the before times pre-remote, we had a lot less kind of communication flow generally. Like we just talked less because we were able to do that in office. And obviously the future employee isn't in office, so we forget about them. But now, if everyone's like, connected, we're on Slack, we're on Teams, we're on all those types of things. What do you think has been the impact of the pre-boarding with the shift to remote? Has it been beneficial? Are there areas where it has got worse as a result of us being more distributed? Thoughts on this?
Yeah, I don't know if the pre-boarding gets impacted as much, just because like whether you're remote or in office, pre-boarding is going to be somewhat similar. But obviously, the in-person, like the onboarding component of it, becomes totally different because you have, you can't do. I think it just requires a lot more coordination overhead and the burden to kind of organize this process than it did before. Because if you're in person, people just kind of follow. You ever seen that movie, like the intern, the Google movie, where they're all kind of interning at Google, and it's a very structured environment. They go from this event to that event and to this room, and you can just kind of follow it. where, you can easily kind of forget and loop somebody out if they're not in the office and they're not like following along. But I also think the other thing too is the swag plays a much bigger role in a remote onboarding experience than in an in-person onboarding experience. Because if you're in the office, it's obvious, like you're around the people, you can see, touch, and feel and experience the culture. If you're sitting at your desk in Iowa, like you need something that makes you feel like, okay, like this is actually a change. Like I'm at this company now. I'm connected to these people in some deeper way. And I think what, Ariel said around the uniform is exactly how I think of it, is like if you got traded from the New York Giants to the San Francisco 49ers, or you got recruited to play basketball at Kansas State or something, the first thing they're doing is getting you a bunch of, merchandise and the sweatshirt and the backpack, because they want you to feel like you're a part of that team already. And, if you skip that part while people are remote, you basically have no real, like you wake up a Monday morning and randomly now you're part of some company, but there's nothing that really signifies that you've joined that company at that point. So I think the swag plays, and I'm not pitching swag. I'm just saying that I think it's so much more important in a remote environment.
No, pitch the swag. I think it's absolutely important. Absolutely important. Because it goes down, I think, at a very deep anthropological level for us. Because if you think about how we used to form groups, we used to form tribes and all this type of stuff, inevitably there will be a way of dress that is unique to that tribe or that group. You see this in a sports game. Sports, a great example. Not only the uniforms on the field, but also the folks who are supporting the team. They're walking around with the shirt. Why would you walk around with your team shirt on as you go into the mall or something? Because you're signaling you belong to that tribe. You don't belong to that tribe. So if you want to create that sense of inclusion, then I think having some sort of uniform is an important component of it. It goes down really before like a very, very old way of human organization, I think. So let's talk about swag as we're talking about it, Mike. What is good swag? I mean, have you got enough data to figure out what actually is good or bad? I mean, is the hoodie still the thing? The mugs? Have we reached peak innovation in terms of what is good swag? Like, do we know what works?
People are very interested in this concept. What is like the new swag item? What's different? What's fun? But at the same time, people want the basics that they're going to use on a daily basis. The items that are high quality. They want the sweatshirt, they want the backpack, they want something for their computer, because that's what they're going to see every day. Now, of course, you can sprinkle in some fun, innovative, sustainable products, all this kind of stuff. And it's, it always catches people by surprise. But I think when we're talking about internal use cases, it's more about practicality, usefulness, and quality than it is like this big attention getter, because you're not like giving it out at a conference and hoping somebody is excited about your brand. It's more about something that they can see every single day. But we like to do things too that aren't just about the swag too, like sometimes like food items, something that they can use in their first week that's like a snack or an energy chew or something. And then what we do personally at Swag Up is we send like a pre-boarding box with books as well. So there's swag in it, but there's also books, and then there's a card that has kind of culture, like values of the company and how those books tie to the company and the culture going forward. So it doesn't always have to be just about like the branded hoodie and the branded bottle and stuff. But I think it's about high quality items that people are actually going to use, brands that they were going to buy anyway. If they're buying the Timbuktu backpack, do the Timbuktu backpack. Don't cheap out on something that they're only going to use twice and never use it. And also keep the branding somewhat subtle. It doesn't have to be in your face that I work at Google. Like if and I think that's important too.
Yeah.
I love this because, as you can see, I'm sartorially challenged. I have very little style, so I'm like wandering into territory that I know nothing about. So this is why I want to just sit on this topic just a little while. Talk to me about quality. Like, what does that mean? Are we talking at a price point? Is there a certain type of weave we need? Like, what is the thing going on here?
Yeah, it's just, if you wouldn't buy it yourself at the store, nobody wants that. Yeah. Like if this is not a shirt that you would, be comfortable paying $20, $30, if it's not a backpack that you would find yourself bringing on a trip or something, then nobody's going to want it. And it's just going to sit there in the corner and it's going to be wasteful. And there's a big push for sustainable swag. And I totally agree that there's waste in this industry and stuff. But at the end of the day, it's only sustainable if people actually get like a long lifetime and life cycle out of that product and they use it ongoing. It doesn't help anybody to use a really cheap, like organic, cotton that they don't want to use or it breaks after 3 uses or something. So I think just the type of, the quality of the materials is very important. Stuff that people would already buy themselves is kind of the heuristic.
I would also add on there that this is also where you start to factor in, we've touched on it a little bit, but like when we think about things like diversity, equity, and inclusion, if you send me an extra large men's shirt, like it's not sustainable because I'm not wearing it. It also sends a pretty strong signal that I'm joining a company that has no idea who I am as a person and doesn't want to celebrate my uniqueness, right? And so I think like getting something that's actually tailored to me, where it's someone put in here, I think, Mary, that having options, I think is a super strong signal to be able to really show like we celebrate a variety of, like we celebrate all different types of people in all different places. I think someone else also mentioned how you deal with people in all different, like globally, right? So we work with predominantly global companies and they all have different swag options that are appropriate for different regions, or they have tailored things that make sense for their local employment market, and that also applies as well to the pre-boarding and onboarding phases. We talk a little bit here a lot about American market, where you might have a 2 to 3 week start from hire date to start date, but in Europe we often have 3 months, right? And so how do you keep a candidate who's becoming an employee engaged over that much longer cycle? And swag is definitely one way that you can do that. And books would be a great idea if you have 3 months before a new job. Maybe you have time to read a book. And I think that there's quite a few other things that you can do. It's challenging to do at scale again, and that's where you would bring in a tool. But I think that this is all really important around making that welcoming experience.
Yeah, I just want to address some comments there. The option to opt out and donate to charity, I'd actually disagree with that. I think that's a bad idea. Because I think if you insert that, you'll create an internal pressure for people to end up doing it more and more. And actually you kind of lose the uniform. Like I'm thinking, what, everyone needs to have the uniform. That's happening. Find some other way to donate to charity or something. I don't know. Feel free to downvote me if you want. Go ahead. That's probably an unpopular opinion. Okay. I think the sizing is a hugely important issue, isn't it? Because are you providing enough variety? Like it's actually a very nice thing to ask, during that pre-boarding phase. It's actually a really smart and sensible thing to do, to ask, hey, we have swag, we're going to give you some cool stuff. Can you give us your sizing? And then give them some options, male, female, large, small, whatever it might be. Give the measurements in, and then you can make sure that whatever is sent is actually going to be of fit. And the person's committed something to generate that. They're starting to interact and creating this experience there. So yeah, I think that's really, really useful as well.
I've also real quick I've found just in general, the people that wear the swag, like on the Zoom calls and stuff, tend to be the people that are like the biggest advocate of the team. They're the ones that stay for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years. The people that get the swag and don't wear it in those first few weeks or months, it's typically an early sign of something, that they're not as connected to the company.
I'll say I'm not the world's biggest swag wearer, but that's often because I get swag that, like, I've been the first female hire on a technical team like 3 times in my career, and they have never had anything that was remotely appropriate for me.
Yep.
Well, and that's is straight away a sign. I was going to say, Michael, I really hope you have some data on this, aside from your intuition, which I trust. But it'd be really interesting to somehow track it.
We'll have to hack into.
Is that guy wearing the hoodie? I want to see the hoodie, because if he's not, that's a retention risk.
Yeah, we have to hack into the Zooms and do like AI on Zoom or something. But in general too, like. Do people interact with the Slack, general channel? Are they, putting emojis back to people? Are they putting messages in their stuff? Are they showing up to the remote all hands? Like, these little signals show that people are getting deeper and deeper connected to the company. And I think those are early signs to watch out for sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about that a little bit. We want to obviously create positive experiences. We want to do all of, stitch all this together. Hopefully some of the stuff we've shared today has been useful. But what are the signs that, that hasn't occurred? Like, you can share responsibility for that. Maybe it's the candidate as well, or the employee. Let's not sort of absorb all the blame on this. But what are the signs that you can think, maybe that person hasn't been sufficiently inculcated into what we're doing?
Oh, I can tell you. They're not doing the things that they need to do to be successful. And often that is because other people are not empowering them to do that. And we see this in our data, right? So they're not being added to the right Slack channels or the calendar events. They didn't even know there was an all hands meeting. Those things happen all the time. Their manager didn't do their 30, 60, 90-day plan. Perfect example of a candidate, of a new employee who is not going to feel engaged. Especially in, I would say, hard to fill talent roles where people have been really heavily recruited. People will rarely just like drop off. They're dropping off because other people are dropping off and they're not getting the support they need.
Yeah. So basically, this is a classic ghosting behavior. We're all familiar with that from a personal relationship point of view, aren't we? You can feel it. The person's lost interest. She's out of there, or he's out of there. You got it. So that intuition is not something you should ignore. But oftentimes now with data in systems, everything is having moved to a distributed way of communicating, particularly a digital way of communicating. All of that information is kind of trackable, and there's a way in which you could figure out where sentiment risk is. And sometimes tooling, I'm not sure whether data does this, but it can flag up some people, hey, listen, the engagement level has gone down on this person. Maybe here's an intercession that a manager might want to intervene on. Folks, we've got 4 minutes left, so we're really running short on time. I just want to say, if anybody's got any questions for Michael or Ariel, please ask them and ask a question in the Q&A section there. We're going to get to them in a moment.
I've got one more comment on the. I think lastly, when you have consistency on the experience, you can start to understand where the onus is. You don't know how to judge performance of an individual if they're not getting the same kind of experience from their manager. So is it the manager's fault? Did they not follow the process? Is it the individual? So then you end up having people in the org for longer than they should be in because you don't know if you can hold them accountable or not. And I think that's something that we've struggled with a lot. Is like, is it the candidate? Is it the person, or is it the process and the system?
That's a really good point, because you've got to have a baseline, like any kind of data. Without some sort of baseline metric, it's useless. You need to create that consistency in order for it to happen. Okay, let's go to questions real quick. Use the ask a question, or shall we say the Q&A function there, so we can get to them. I can see some questions in chat, by the way. So if you move those questions into Q&A, and we'll be able to get to them. Okay, this one for Harris. Fanarov. Harris is saying, what type is it's right up there? How did that happen? It's magic. Well, this is completely thrown me. What type of industries tend to value pre-boarding most? Any thoughts on this? Ariel, let's throw it over to you.
So, hard to recruit talent, for sure. This is going to be a bunch of things that we know, like engineers, but it's also going to be things like train drivers, spaces where there are not as many people, the supply and demand don't match. A second big place where you're going to see the pre-boarding is where it's a revenue generating role. Yeah. So when you are bringing in someone who's going to be in sales enablement or something like that, really getting someone excited and getting them, reducing the time to productivity for those roles are big business drivers. Having those people be slower to come on actually costs the business money.
Yeah, really, really good. Okay, let's go with next question. Amy, is that right? Yes, it is. This is obviously a lot to keep track of. How do you find the time to do all of these things and get people set up as well? Use Dado, right? Use the tool.
Yeah.
That's answered. There's products you need to spend money on in order to get it done, Amy. That's what I'd recommend. If you need a reference, just come to us. We'll be able to give you a reference. Okay, let's go to Brian. Brian, say tips to provide providing the same pre-boarding, onboarding experience across different countries. So you got multi-site sort of operation. How do you make sure there's consistency across there? Should it be that consistent? Maybe you need to localize it. Any thoughts on this, Michael? Let's go to you.
Yeah, I think it's a hybrid thing. Like, you want to be able to contextualize it to the team on the ground and their office experience and their, whatever service or function they're doing there. But at the same time, you do want people to feel like they are part of a greater whole as well. So, I think it's just making sure that you're able to kind of balance the two sides of that equation.
Yeah, it may just be giving you. Sorry, Ari, but say.
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's two big elements of a pre-boarding and onboarding experience. One is the compliance side stuff, which varies pretty dramatically depending on where you are in the globe. And then some of the other stuff is very much around the cultural and